I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar presented by eDynamic. We will be recording this webinar and will be providing an opportunity for people to have questions at the end that we'll have a chance to answer. Today's webinar is the first in a series around digital marketing for business-to-business software companies. eDynamic does quite a bit of work within this space, particularly companies that have field sales force are looking to move their product and provide the leads that the field sales force needs to execute. Today we're going to look at a variety of components that make up some of the challenges that today's software companies have around digital marketing. And we're also going to take a look at how we have spent time with our customers in approaching this problem. We're going to start with the backdrop to what's going on in the software industry and really what is making it quite challenging for a lot of organizations. Many organizations have started from premise-based solutions with software licensing models. There's a quick growth to moving to more of a subscription-based model. The notion of subscription-based models puts more of an onus on actually maintaining the relationship of the customer over time because it's much easier for people to switch between products. So in terms of customer acquisition, that's still a big component of it, but also that customer retention becomes a large component as well. The other thing is that many of the projects that are going on now really are starting to be driven by people outside of the IT organization. People within all business units are having budget, and with the onset and growth of SaaS platforms, it makes it much easier for them to go out, do their own research, and make their own buying decisions. At the same time, people that are doing digital marketing also are gaining in their ability to have monies available to make their own decisions. If we begin to look at some of the changes that are occurring, we can see that the growth of subscription-based licensing models is compounding at 7.5% per year over the last several years. And that kind of the penetration in the market for SaaS has gone from 4.9% in 2011 and should reach a penetration of about 24% by 2016. This really is a game changer for how people sell software and also how customers think about the software. This notion of what it takes to sell the software is not just a one-time situation anymore. It's really about getting people in and maintaining that relationship. It's about the focus on the customer engagement over a period of time, whether that be through support, whether that be just reaffirming the value that your organization has with the customer, which is really very different from where it was several years ago, where you had the initial sale, the license revenue, and then you had ongoing maintenance. Here we've got something that's spread over a very long time, and where the switching costs for a lot of these folks is fairly low. Customers are making these buying decisions on their own, often without the guidance of the CIO. So that's going to make it very different in terms of who we sell to as marketers, who's making the buying decision, and who we begin to speak to as marketers. A lot of forces really have culminated to make that happen, including things like people being used to being able to download mobile apps on their own, bring your own device, low monthly subscription costs, try and buy. All of these really come together to create an environment where people feel empowered to make a lot of these buying decisions without the CIO. From the perspective of the CMO, people that are responsible for driving revenue for their software companies that begin to sell to this new group of people that feel empowered to buy the software. There's a couple things going on. One, today's CMO as a digital marketer has a lot more visibility into their lead flow, how they sell, and what is important in terms of selling from an attribution perspective than any of the previous generations of marketers. This definitely empowers the CMO in a way that previous marketers haven't been empowered because they're able to show direct accountability for revenue. And what we're seeing is that there's really a shift that's occurring where those responsible for marketing are able to demand and gain more budget because they're taking a deeper role in defining the underlying infrastructure that is used to deliver their digital services, digital marketing services. So if you look at some of the things that are coming out right now, with looking ahead to 2014, nearly half of the B2B marketers are looking to expand their budgets. And a lot of this really is around being able to take advantage of the new technologies that are coming out. So, thinking about some of the takeaways for this section here, clearly the software industry is changing with the growth of SaaS. No longer are we just focused on that initial customer acquisition, though that's very important. But overall, we're looking to maintain an ongoing engagement and be able to show demonstrable value through our brand so we can maintain that customer because the switching costs are coming down. And for people to move from one SaaS platform to another is becoming much easier. So the challenges from a marketing perspective are shifting. The marketers themselves also have gained new momentum in their organizations typically. They're responsible for more technology. They're gaining budget. And they'll be looking to drive more of the overall technology budget moving forward. One other area that we spend a lot of time in is this notion of the customer journey. And there's a couple things that will come together in today's webinar that we want to cover. The customer journey really is about understanding how the customer is going to achieve what they want to as they engage with you digitally. And we spend a lot of time with our clients mapping that journey. Now, most of us are familiar with the customer life cycle. And as marketers, we're familiar with this whole notion of the awareness stage and search and evaluate and finally commit. We'd like to look at it a little more broadly than that from the standpoint that we believe there's definitely an acquisition component and then there's a retention component for most organizations now. And within all of this, we begin to recognize that there are various journeys that exist depending on what people want to accomplish. For today's discussion, we're going to look at the new customer acquisition journey. We're going to talk about many of the considerations around that journey for you as a marketer in this evolving landscape of how we sell software, which is across the board. So as we begin to dig into this, we want to take a look at, how things are changing from a journey perspective. When we begin to apply this notion of journey to our marketing tactics and our strategies. Not very long ago, and we even see this now in many of the organizations that we walk into, people look at the journeys from a channel perspective. In other words, as if the customer were to come and only think of you from your web channel, from your email, from your social. But we all know that really isn't the case. The customer thinks of you from your brand perspective. They just happen to be on their phone at the moment and be accessing information about you through perhaps a website. They may be sitting at their desk and getting an email. So when we think of these journeys today, let's say the customer acquisition journey in this case, we really must think of them across all the channels. And we begin to also think of them, the whole digital aspect is critical to that whole engagement and conversion process. And for many software companies, it is really the primary mechanism outside of perhaps trade shows and other physical events you go to. It really is the primary driver to growing your business. The other area is looking at journeys in truly a finely segmented basis, being able to adjust our messaging in the experience in that journey for the various people coming to the site. That becomes very important to enable that deeper engagement and to meet the expectations of people. So as we go forward, we look at journeys when we do work with our customers from a couple different perspectives. One is that the journey really begins to guide us from what channels we begin to pick as we begin to engage with various roles that go through that journey. So whether that be a social channel, whether that be web across a variety of different maybe microsites, landing pages, mobile, perhaps it's through the use of webinars. We do a lot of inbound work. And then, of course, content marketing, whether that be white papers and other thought leadership pieces that we keep on our website. There also is the possibility of private communities where people log into your community for the ability to discuss with other people that use your software and be able to understand the value that your software provides. So all of this begins to, we gain clarity through the use of the journey and beginning to understand how people want to think about achieving a certain goal. From a customer acquisition journey perspective, the goal of the customer really is around being able to make a decision as to whether they want to commit to your organization or not, whether they want to take on that application that you have, either install it or sign up for it for a subscription. So everything that leads up to that decision are those pieces that we need to think about. And content is a big part of that. So again, as we begin to think of content, we do that from the perspective of perhaps the various roles that might be engaged. You know, if you're in a specific industry, obviously the roles will change. If you're selling financial software versus manufacturing software, obviously the people that you will engage with, that are the decision makers, that are the influencers, that will be specific to you. Nonetheless, the principles of being able to identify those roles, understand what's important to those people in terms of problems that they have, the needs that they want to have addressed, all of that needs to occur in the context of who they are and where they are in this buyer's journey. And so we begin to map this out from a buyer's journey perspective, because we're now just focused on the acquisition journey here, and have that drive everything from the roles, which the industries, how they make decisions, and so on. And that begins to flesh out the content map that we'll be eventually using. Another big part of the journey approach is to leverage that journey and begin to understand what is it that we want to measure along the way. Because depending on where they are in this journey, we may want to define different metrics. And those metrics will eventually help us to understand where along the journey they are. They become trigger points to say, hey, this person has finally done this. That means that they must be this far in their buyer's journey. And we begin to look at how we define the metrics, what KPIs, and then how to operationalize that by actually plugging that into whatever analytics application that we have. So again, The journey is a way for us to look at engaging with the firm, with your organization, from the perspective of the customer. And there may be a lot of different journeys that we might map out. Could be the acquisition journey, could it be a problem to resolution journey. Maybe the customer's looking to do an upgrade, or we may want to upsell them and engage them in that perspective. So again, thinking through what journeys those customers may have or those prospects may have with your organization begins to identify how to employ your digital infrastructure. In addition, it just becomes an overall framework for marketing because it provides a common perspective and also a common language in which you can begin to discuss this with the other contributors within your marketing team. As we begin to go on, we want to talk about some of the challenges that we encounter as marketers. So one of the things that we find, we have this great desire to employ the knowledge that we gather from these journeys and begin to do things like personalization of content as we begin to target things. We want to create the right experience. But we also want to do that not just on the website. We want to do it in emails. We want to do that in our social environments. And one of the biggest concerns that we see that people have is they don't have a unified view of the customer. And that really becomes a challenge because as soon as you don't have that unified view, you really begin to engage with customers in a very segmented kind of siloed manner rather in a unified manner. And what we want to do is be able to bring in truly an integrated way to engage with customers, where we can do that across email, web, social, perhaps private community, in a manner in which the messaging that people get, regardless of where they're at, what channel they go to, remains the same, depending on where they are in that stage of their journey. So what we typically find for folks that are driving the digital environment within their organization is that people often start with a CMS, or they may start with a marketing automation system. Most folks already have a CRM in place. And so they begin their journey as digital marketers with probably 2 or more platforms. But what we see is that there's a chasm that they have to cross in terms of once they've purchased the software, that CMS salesperson told you, yeah, you can do personalization, it'll do this, it'll do that, and you're going to get X amount of lift moving forward. Same thing, same story was told by the marketing automation vendor. Same story would be told by the CRM vendor. But they all tell their own story about how you're going to achieve lift from an acquisition perspective, how you're going to reduce churn, whatever your objective may be. But what we're seeing is independently, these applications really don't provide that much in terms of contribution to lift. Where they really begin to generate some significant gain is when we can begin to bring them together from an integrated perspective. And what that means is that we're moving from siloed approach of engaging with our customers to really integrating how we engage with our customers across these disparate platforms, which means that we have a single view of the customer, which means when the customer spends time on the website, our marketing automation application is aware of what they've clicked on, what they've selected, what they've downloaded. When someone updates the CRM application with an offline engagement, perhaps they reached out to someone or someone called in, and that information is logged and questions were asked, that's moved forward to the marketing automation system. So it's aware of it. And then the CMS is also aware of it so that when it engages with that same person later, it can take that information and begin to personalize that experience. So those are things that we work with we work on with our customers is really moving them across that chasm to the point where they have a much more deeply integrated set of tools that allow them to have a unified voice to the customer. What we see out there is that the majority of the people really fall into this initial section of digital enlightenment. A lot of people have now multiple platforms and are looking to move to digital integration. So very, very few people really have gotten there because it takes quite a bit of effort, and you have to have a real strategy for how you want to make that happen and how you're going to utilize that once you do have that in place. So some takeaways here. True digitalization is not easy, but it pays. We see some significant lift once you begin to have that unified way of engaging with clients, where the messaging coming from email campaigns, from your trigger campaigns, the messaging on your website, on social, and so on, is communicating in a unified manner so that where that person is in their buyer's journey is being addressed the same across all those platforms. But it really requires that we have a single view of where that person is and the metrics in place, as I mentioned earlier, to identify where they are in that buying cycle. So let's think about customer acquisition in the context of all of the things that we've discussed thus far. So, one of the things that we tend to hammer home to our clients is that the numbers come up at 60% all the way to 70% of the buyer's decisioning has occurred before they pick up the phone, per se, and call you to purchase a product. So we always engage with our own clients and ask the big question there: how do you influence that 60 to 70%? How do you keep them engaged with your organization so that you get them to the point where they're actually picking up the phone? So we're always thinking about, what is it that is going to drive them through that customer acquisition or that buyer's journey. There's a couple considerations. First of all, we need to understand how they move between one stage of that journey to the next. Really, what's moving them forward. And we want to also align with our audience, so that we're, again, speaking the language they want to hear and that they expect. And then, are we answering their questions along the way? Because in the end, they're trying to make a decision on whether or not to commit time and resources to your brand so that you're actually having an additional customer and you're solving a problem for them. And finally, are we touching them sufficiently throughout this journey to actually bring that to a commitment? So as we begin to think about alignment, one of the things that we spend time with now with many of our customers, and they always have that question about, should we have a mobile app? Should we have a mobile site? Many people start off, because they already have an existing site, without having a mobile site. But things are changing so rapidly. Over the last year and a half to now, we see a significant shift to mobile use of the Internet and the web. And that becomes very evident very quickly, even with something as simple as Google Analytics, as you see people coming to your site and how they want to consume the information, what browsers they're using, what devices they're using. There's a couple statistics out there, but many folks agree now, and the one here in the yellow is from Microsoft, actually, is that by mid-2014, there will truly be a crossover, that the majority of Internet usage that typically has been on the desktop will be taken over by mobile devices. And that's a pretty significant statement, And it becomes a hurdle for a lot of organizations that have perhaps a legacy CMS, legacy website, and are looking to how do we address this. So again, one thing to keep in the back of our minds, we really do need to think about truly being cross-device in terms of our ability to deliver content on the web. The other interesting one came from ComScore. They showed, based on some research they did, the usage of various devices throughout the day. And I think that's very telling of how many people consume their information. They start off on the commute. Maybe they're standing in the train if you're on the East Coast. On the West Coast, you might be stuck in traffic, fortunately. And, they sit down at their desk. In the evening, they're in front of the TV, but they also have their tablet open. And they're consuming information, and they're doing research. So these are where we can really begin to engage people, but we have to be able to make our content available there. The other is around channel. We talked about channel earlier, making sure we align with the various stages of the buyer's journey, making sure that depending on the role that we want to engage, could be across blue collar or even white collar, and how people engage with an organization and a brand varies. If you're selling manufacturing software, for instance, and you happen to be engaging people on the shop floor, that may be very different than the person sitting up above behind the glass as the COO. But both people are involved in that buying decision at some level. But both may be reading and consuming their information very differently. This was from Google, and I would urge you guys to look at what Google's done. They've done a lot of research, and they did this jointly with Corporate Executive Board, which is a nonprofit think tank. And they did a great job looking at various industries and how various channels impact the buying decision. And note, they also use this point of where we cross over to, we've got awareness, consideration, and intent, and then that decision is being made. And then as we make that decision, there's those supportive channels there helping to drive that decision forward. Well, it was very interesting. They made this as an interactive tool, and you can select different industries, and this happens to be high tech. It didn't have software specifically. But this is not unlike the experience that we have as well. We clearly know that early on in the awareness stage, things like blogs, even ads in LinkedIn and various places on the web often catch people's attention. They happen to be in Google, they do a search because they have a problem they need to solve, and that gets them going down a certain path. And from there, we hopefully can engage them to a point where our brand appears multiple times. They begin to say, oh, I've seen these guys, and we pull them in, hopefully getting them to the website, and ideally, as we all hope as marketers, getting their email address and beginning that nurturing relationship. But all of these channels affect that along the way. And this was a great example of that, and it's interesting how Google is now taking B2B marketing, not B2C, this is purely focused on B2B, now very seriously. Content relevance. Some of the biggest concerns that we see with many folks that we work with is that they have a very generic website. They have very generic email and nurturing campaigns. And they've never taken the time to step back and really wrap a content strategy and marketing plan around it. That really starts by understanding your customers, their needs, where they are in the buying cycle, so on, and beginning to align content with that. We see that as one of the key things that can make a huge difference in the level of engagement and also just their general disposition toward your brand. If they feel that you truly understand their problem space, that you are able to address their questions, that the thought leadership was almost tailor-written for them, if they feel that, there's going to be a higher level of engagement and a higher likelihood that they're going to get closer to that commitment point with you than they are with someone else. And the best way to do that is, again, spending the time to understand the audience and really getting to the point where we're creating content that aligns with their expectations. So a couple of quick takeaways. We really need to make it easy for buyers to engage us. So whether that is a cross-device experience where they can get to us, get to the information they want regardless of device, and then of course across the channels that they engage with. We have to be where they are. And I know that sounds very obvious in many cases, but actually executing that becomes a challenge for folks. And we spend a lot of time working on how to get that done. So the other part is speaking to them in the language that they want to be spoken in, whether that is from an industry perspective in the vertical, whether that is from the problem space that they're coming from, or even the role that they have within the organization. All of this, again, needs to be taken into account. And the only way we can do that is really begin to map that out, starting with that buyer's journey, as we talked about, spending time understanding the roles, problems, and so on. That can get us there. So making it happen. One of the biggest challenges is, once we've got all this content, we understand who the buyers are, we want to begin to target it, is really, operationalizing a lot of it. Having enough content becomes a challenge. Having that single view of the customer becomes a challenge. And what we want to do is be able to understand what it's going to take to pull this together. And we typically look at really an ecosystem of different platforms, including the content management platform, obviously to drive a huge amount of the experience that people have with your organization. Marketing automation, everyone knows about that now, obviously. It's just become so prevalent. But it's almost overtaken the CMS in importance. And I know a lot of people start with content management or start with marketing automation and then finally go to CMS. But what we find is really that the majority of the interaction with your organization is still driven through the content management system. When you build triggered emails, email campaigns, and nurturing campaigns, in the end, we still want to drive them back to our website so they engage with the richness of content that we can have on there, where we can actually do thought leadership marketing. Analytics obviously becomes a big part of it too, because as we said earlier, if we can't measure, we don't even know where people are in the journey. We can identify trigger points along the way in the journey by identifying the correct metrics and have that tell us how far along people are. Social and community platforms, clearly many CMS platforms today are able to write once, publish to many networks, whether that be Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Those things are very common now. But private communities, particularly for software companies and high-tech organizations, are an important part of several things. One, during that customer acquisition process, people want to know, by speaking with other folks, tell me about the company, tell me about the software. And they're able to speak to other birds of a feather, per se, often by joining your community. And then, of course, later, as we'll discuss later in this series, that community platform can also support things like technical support and other things like that. That we see that as a growing part of how many software companies want to engage people, is using the voice of their existing customers to really communicate and engage with the new prospect. And then finally, CRM, which continues to be a core part of this, particularly when we have a field sales force and we need to push lead flow out to them. So we call this digital ecosystem table stakes, because we see this as like everything that everyone needs to get going. There's many other things that might sit on top of this, but these are the basics to get out the door. You know, and once you have these different platforms, then we run into some of these concerns, which are, how do you get all these things to work in unison? So often we have multiple lead profiles. Let's say you have a CMS. It captures lead flow. It might store it there. If you've got marketing automation, perhaps you push it to marketing automation, or marketing automation may have its own landing pages from which you capture leads. Then you've got people entering information from the CRM. How do you get to combine these? What we really want to avoid is this notion of this disrupted digital journey, which usually occurs when people encounter your various channels, email and web, and they don't align. I get an email from you, says one thing, and speaks to me perhaps very directly in terms of my needs and who I am. Then I come to your website, and now I get a generic experience again. What we really want to do is align that. And worst of all is this notion of the irrelevant communication, when there's really no plan wrapped around how all of these channels may work together to reach that person's objective. Again, if we're in the acquisition journey, then their objective is to make a decision whether they want to do business with you or not. But how do we have all of the channels working together to get them to that point? So making that acquisition engine work. So typically we start with a look at the buying cycle, you know, as we did earlier in our discussion. And we begin to understand the segmentation around that. So that may be various roles that we overlay on the buying cycle, eventually overlaying various motivators and pain points for those roles. You know, as we mentioned, might be someone on the shop floor. It could be the CEO of that manufacturing organization. And each one of those roles has different motivators and different pain points. We begin to map that out. Then we begin to look at the content. And as we have this understanding of the roles across the buying cycle and begin to understand what's important to them along their journey, we begin to map that out in a manner in which we've defined perhaps verticals. We may have their pain points, and then we map it to a piece of content. Now that content could be something that shows up on the website. It could be mapped to a white paper. It could be mapped to something that could be reused within an email. Again, it's the ability to have consistency as we begin to speak to people at these different points of time in that buying cycle. Then we look at leveraging our marketing automation system and our content management system and our analytics system to begin to score these people, to understand where they are beyond their journey, and what is that next best piece of content we want to put in front of them. What should that experience look like as we move forward? Is there a particular call to action that we know that people at this point of the buying cycle, they're ready to get to maybe this webinar that moves them into a point where they're ready to pick up the phone and call a salesperson? So those are things that we begin to think about. And then finally, the ability to automate this in truly a cross-channel manner that's closed loop. And this is really the difficult part, but in time, we kind of move our way into this. It doesn't need to happen all at once. we bite off a chunk and get that done and move on to the next. And as I said, many people often start with one piece and move on. So maybe from content management, going to marketing automation, or the other way around. The other part, we talked a lot about content. I found this from Content Marketing Institute, and I thought this was very good. This was specifically a study they did around software marketers, and in terms of how they tailor their content. And they ordered this by profile of the individual decision makers, company characteristics, stage in the buying cycle, personalized content preferences, and so on. I found that very interesting and appropriate for our discussion today. Again, this is from the Content Management Institute. So one of the things that we've done to bring these systems together, we understand content management, marketing automation, CRM very well here at eDynamic. We work with all three of these platforms plus a variety of other categories of platforms. We saw this challenge about 3 years ago already, and so one of the things that we did was begin to solve that by bringing these together and creating this single view of the buyer. So really it is just a matter of allowing one platform to have visibility into the other. There's no data mart, nothing that sophisticated. It's fairly simple, but works quite well. So it creates one view of the customer. And we've written integrations between various content management systems and marketing automation systems, so it makes it very easy for personalization, for instance, on a CMS to be based on information that was captured in the CRM and information that was captured in the marketing automation system. The other part then, of course, in operationalizing things is making sure that the content aligns with the buyer's journey, works with the roles, addresses their needs, and so on. And that's part of the personalization that needs to occur. So once we have a content map, we all have a single view of the customer as to where they are in the buying cycle and what interests they have, or what industry they're from. Then we can begin to codify that within the CMS from a personalization perspective. And many of today's modern content management systems provide personalization, as well as personalization within nurturing campaigns and so on. So those are the typical directions we go with the tools that we have. So one thing to say is don't become too preoccupied with the tools. The tools are a large part of the overall digital marketing ecosystem, but the real core of this is understanding the customer and mapping that to the content that you want to push out. Getting that single view of the customer becomes very important, and I think that based on our experience, that's probably the most important thing next to making sure you have a clear understanding of who your customer is and how you're going to engage with them. And then finally, creating content really is one of the most difficult parts in this. Outside of getting the systems to work, what we see as a large challenge for most of the marketing organizations is just having the bandwidth to get the content out. So with that in mind, really it's a matter of focusing on starting small, being very focused with your personalization efforts. And then as you get more bandwidth in getting things done, begin to move down the priority list of who your target customers are and so on.